I'm an environmental scientist with a PhD in chemical oceanography. I have been working on studies of the environmental fate and effects of various contaminants in the environment for 30 years. And during that time, I've been a consultant to both government scientists on the Exxon Valdez accident and also BP on the Deepwater Horizon accident. I'm currently retained by BP to look at conditions in the Gulf following the spill. Well, the Deepwater Horizon accident was certainly a serious event, and there was certainly some injury, but the impact was generally limited in duration. Nearly 5 years later, the data show that most impacted areas in the Gulf are recovering. First of all, for fish, the data from state and federal agencies show that Gulf fish and shellfish populations are robust, and that commercial seafood landings have generally been consistent with pre-spill ranges. For birds, our analyses and field observations conducted to date indicated that if there was an impact to bird productivity and nesting, that impact was limited. And finally, marshes. Marshes are an interesting case because most of them were left to recover naturally due to concerns about habitat sensitivity to active cleanup. And at maximum oiling in 2010, 86 miles of marsh were categorized as heavily oiled. By early 2014, less than a mile, just 0.7 of a mile, were classified as heavily oiled. Laboratory studies are important when looking at oil spills. They help us to understand what kind of effects might exist and at what concentration those effects might exist. But we need to think really carefully about how those studies are best translated to the environment. For example, most of the oil concentrations that were tied to effects in many of the laboratory studies that we see are seldom seen in the Gulf, even during the data collection that occurred during and after the spill. So if we look just at the test results from the laboratory, we may overestimate environmental effects. Well, there were several conditions that were unique to Deepwater Horizon that helped limit the impacts of the spill. First of all, it occurred more than 40 miles from shore in deep water, so there was time for natural processes such as biodegradation and evaporation to reduce the volume and the concentrations of the oil. In addition, the microbial community that exists naturally in the Gulf is acclimated to the presence of oil from natural seeps. This makes this particular microbial community well suited to help rapidly break down that type of oil. And finally, the oil was a light crude oil, and that is more easily evaporated and degraded than heavier crude oils. And you compare the circumstances of Deepwater Horizon to the Exxon Valdez, where much heavier oil was spilled in shallow water, close to shore, and that oil impacted an extremely sensitive habitat where microbial community that was not acclimated to the oil was present. This slowed down the process of oil breaking down. The many papers and research I've seen do not suggest that long-term population level impacts to any species are likely. Individual organisms were likely harmed, but I have not seen data showing that enough of them were harmed to impact overall populations.